What's good, YouTube? I'm Robert with the Crosscut Creations channel. Today I'm going to show you how I finish a resin pen blank. This is not going to be an assembly video because each pen kit is different, but I will show you how I finish and polish up resins, acrylics, epoxies, anything in that family. This excludes hybrids, so these are specifically resins of some sort. Now, you might already notice if you have a good eye that there are some scratches in this blank. Sometimes when I get close to the bushings, I'll switch over to a handy 120 grit gouge and I will do some final shaping. So the way that works is, now that I'm down to the bushings, I will take my Abranet sandpaper, and I have grits 120, 180, 240, 320, and 400. I will sand with each of those, and I will do this with the lathe under 500 RPMs. And after I do this, I also do that in reverse. I do that in reverse, and then after each grit, what I'll do is I'll sand, I'll turn the lathe off, and then I'll spin this by hand and do some hand sanding this way with the lathe off. So I will show you that now. We've got our first grit of 120. So we're just going to sand a little bit. And once I think I'm pretty much there, I'm going to turn the lathe off, and I'm just going to run my sandpaper back and forth across the blank while it's being rotated, just to help get some of those scratches out. Now that I have that, 120 is done, I move it over here, I turn the lathe back on, and I move up to the next grit. So I'm gonna do that for 180, 240, 320, and 400. I'm not gonna necessarily make you sit through all of that, but once I finish that, I will show you the next step from there. Okay, now that we are sanded through 400 with dry sanding, I'm going to use micro mesh. So micro mesh comes in pads like this. You can also get them in bigger sheets, but I have the smaller squares. This is a wet sanding system that goes from 1500 grit to 12,000 grit. What I end up doing is I'll put some water on this micro mesh pad, and I will move this back and forth as long as it needs it, and as soon as it starts to build up a slurry, that's when I know that I can move on and the grit and the scratches are getting removed. The one thing to note when you are sanding, whether it's dry or wet sanding, is to never stay in one place for too long, because then you'll do more damage to the blank than good. So I'll go ahead and turn the lathe on. I do sand, I do micro mesh in the forward motion. And I will start this first pad by wetting it. And we will continue to do this through the 9 micro mesh pads. I'm not going to have you watch all of them, but you'll get the idea after the first 1 or 2. Sometimes I like to count to 30. It's not an official hard 30 seconds, but it's just to tell me that I've spent some time on that pad. You can see there how we've built up that slurry. So I'm gonna go ahead and move on to the next pad. Let me grab the next pad here. And they are color coded, as I have mentioned. So this next one's green. I'm gonna put some water on there, and we'll go to the next pad. And then I'll do this for the remaining 7 pads. And once I finish those, I'll come back and we will continue on with our finishing process. Okay, we are back, and I've run through the micro mesh grits, and now I'm just going to turn the lathe on. And the blank is still a little wet from all the wet sanding that we just did, so I'm just going to take a paper towel and dry the blank off real quick, just to make sure that there's no moisture on the blank. I might turn this over, make sure you have a separate dry section. There's the wet section. I have this dry section, so I'm just going to run over it one more time just to make sure. Now that our blank is dry, I'm going to use a three-step system. I'm going to use a three-step system where I have Novus 3, that is a heavy scratch remover. Novus 2 is a fine scratch remover, and then Novus 1 is a polish. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to take a piece of paper towel. I'm just going to fold it up here, and again, I run my polishing the same as I do my micro mesh regiment. I run it in forward. I turn the lathe on to about 750 RPMs or so. Okay, I'm going to take a paper towel, and I've folded it in half. I'm going to take my Novus 3, that's the heavy scratch remover, that's where we're going to start, and I'm just going to put a little dab on our paper towel, and I'm just going to make sure I coat the surface of our blank. Now I'm just going to sit here and work this in for a little bit, and while I'm doing that, I'm just making sure that I'm constantly moving. I'm not staying in one spot for too long, and I'm just consistently moving across the entire blank, but also not touching the bushings, because the bushings will they'll tarnish and they will bring a black residue onto your blank that could ruin a blank that you've worked so hard to get to this point. So once I think that I have that worked in pretty good, I'm going to get a dry piece of paper towel, and I'm just going to slowly move across the blank just to buff it out. Nothing fancy, no tricks. Might do that one more time just for good measure. And now that we have that, we can move on to our Novus 2. Novus 2 is going to be a fine scratch remover. So I'm going to open that up. Again, I've folded a piece of paper towel, just like Novus 3. Novus 2 is going to act the same way. We'll put a little bit onto our paper towel, and then we will coat the blank in the Novus 2. This one does come out brown instead of white, so that is completely okay. Again, I'll work it in, I'll work the Novus 2 in just like I worked the Novus 3, and then once I think that I have a decent, I've worked it a decent amount, I'm going to fold this over. I'm going to find a dry section of paper towel, and I'm just going to wipe across. Again, we want to do our best to not touch the bushings, because we don't want any of that, the residue to come off. So now that we've gone through Novus 3 and 2, now we're ready for 1. 1 is a polish, and 1 is slightly different. It has this spray nozzle that I like to spray on the paper towel. I've sprayed a little bit on the paper towel. That might be a little hard to see, but I just rub this across the blank just to give it a little bit of shine. So now that I've done that, and this doesn't take very long at all, now that I have that worked in, I'm going to grab a dry piece of paper towel, and I'm just going to, again, make sure that our blank is dry of anything and then that way it'll be ready for assembly. So now I'll go ahead and turn off the lathe. That's Novus 3, 2, and 1. And now we can see that we have a spectacular blank. Let me bring in a little closer here. Whoops. Just so you can see that blank. And that blank now is ready for assembly. So that's how I finish my acrylics, resins, epoxies, anything that is not wood or a hybrid. I don't do a CA finish on my resins, and that's all there is to it. It doesn't take too much time at all. And if you like this video, give it the thumbs up. Leave me a comment. How do you finish your resin blanks? I'd love to know. Maybe we can learn something together. So again, make sure you like, comment, share, and subscribe. Hit the bell for notifications so you don't miss another one of my videos, and we'll see you next time.